A piercing scream followed the sound of a stun gun discharge. The sharp crack echoed across Willowbrook Community Park like a gunshot, causing birds to scatter from the nearby oak trees in panicked flight. In the sudden silence that followed, only the sound of labored breathing and muffled sobs could be heard over the distant hum of afternoon traffic. 12-year-old Ben Martinez lay curled on the grass beneath the playground equipment, his small body trembling uncontrollably. His mother, Sarah's voice pierced the air as she rushed toward her son, her sandals slapping against the concrete walkway. The acrid smell of discharged electricity lingered in the humid September air, mixing with the sweet scent of freshly cut grass and the metallic tang of fear. 20 minutes earlier, Ben had been practicing his breathing exercises just as Dr. Williams had taught him. The park was his sanctuary, a place where the structured environment and familiar surroundings helped him regulate his emotions when the world became too overwhelming. He had been counting the leaves on the maple tree, using the rhythmic pattern to calm his racing thoughts after a particularly difficult day at school. Sarah watched from a nearby bench, her phone discreetly recording as part of their therapy protocol. Dr. Williams had recommended documenting Ben's coping strategies to track his progress and identify triggers. The small body camera clipped to her jacket was barely visible, designed for clinical observation rather than surveillance. She had grown accustomed to the weight of it, a necessary tool in their journey toward understanding her son's unique needs. Ben's autism manifested in ways that made public spaces challenging. Loud noises could send him into sensory overload. Unexpected changes in routine could trigger anxiety attacks, and social interactions required careful navigation. But here, in the park, surrounded by predictable patterns and natural sounds, he found peace. His therapist had identified this location as an ideal practice environment for developing independent coping skills. The first sign of trouble came in the form of Karen Hutchinson's clipped voice, cutting through the afternoon calm. As the self-appointed guardian of Willowbrook's Homeowners Association standards, Karen had made it her mission to patrol the community spaces with military precision. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her pressed khaki pants and polo shirt gave her the appearance of someone perpetually ready for inspection. "Excuse me, but that child needs to be supervised properly." Karen's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. She approached Sarah's bench with purposeful steps, her clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. Sarah looked up from her phone, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry. What do you mean I'm right here watching him?" "He's exhibiting aggressive behavior patterns, rocking back and forth, making those sounds. My grandchildren use this playground, and I won't have them exposed to that kind of disturbance." Karen's eyes narrowed as she gestured toward Ben, who was quietly humming to himself while tracing patterns in the sand with a stick. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her son's stimming behaviors were as natural to him as breathing, harmless, repetitive movements that helped him process sensory information. To see them characterized as aggressive felt like a betrayal of everything they had worked to achieve in their journey toward acceptance and understanding. "Those aren't aggressive behaviors. Ben has autism, and he's using coping strategies his therapist taught him. He's not bothering anyone." Sarah's voice remained steady, but her hands tightened around her phone. The camera continued recording, capturing Karen's increasingly hostile demeanor. "I don't care what fancy label you want to put on it. This is a family park, and that child is a threat to the safety of other children. Either you control him, or I'll call security." Karen's volume increased with each word, drawing curious stares from other park visitors. Ben's head snapped up at the raised voices, his sensitive hearing picking up the tension in the air. His comfortable routine had been shattered by the unexpected confrontation, and Sarah could see the early signs of an approaching meltdown in his increasingly rapid breathing and the way his hands began to flutter near his sides. Please lower your voice. You're upsetting him, and that's going to make things worse for everyone. Sarah stood up slowly, moving toward her son with practiced calm. She had learned to recognize the warning signs and knew that Ben needed immediate support to prevent a full sensory overload episode. But Karen interpreted Sarah's movement as defiance rather than protection. Her face flushed red with indignation, and she reached into her purse with deliberate motion. "Don't you tell me to lower my voice on public property. If you can't control your child, then someone needs to do something about it." The civilian taser emerged from Karen's purse like a weapon of personal vendetta. The bright yellow device gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, its safety switch already disengaged. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized the true danger her son faced. This wasn't just about playground politics or community standards. This was about a woman who viewed her child's disability as a threat worthy of violent response. "Put that away immediately. You cannot threaten a child with a weapon." Sarah's voice carried the desperate authority of a mother protecting her young. But Karen had already made her decision. Ben's meltdown began in earnest as the strange device appeared in his peripheral vision. His coping strategies crumbled under the weight of overwhelming sensory input and the palpable tension radiating from the adults around him. He began rocking more intensely, his humming growing louder as he tried to self-regulate in an increasingly chaotic environment. "See, he's becoming violent. This is exactly what I was talking about." Karen raised the taser with shaking hands, her finger hovering over the trigger. "Stay back, or I'll use this to protect myself and the other children here." The moment stretched like eternity, punctuated only by Ben's increasing distress calls and the distant sound of children playing on the opposite side of the park. Sarah could see other parents beginning to notice the commotion, their faces reflecting confusion and growing alarm as they realized what was unfolding before them. "Please, just put it down. He's just a little boy, and he's scared. You're making this so much worse than it needs to be." Sarah's voice cracked with emotion, but she maintained her position between Karen and her son, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger a tragedy. Karen's response was swift and merciless. The taser discharged with a sharp crack that seemed to split the air itself, followed immediately by Ben's agonized scream as 50,000 volts coursed through his small body. He collapsed onto the grass, convulsing as the electrical current overwhelmed his nervous system. His therapy tools scattered around him like broken promises. Sarah's scream of horror mingled with her son's cries as she dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his trembling form. The acrid smell of discharged electricity filled her nostrils as she tried to assess his injuries while fighting her own surge of panic and rage. Her body camera captured every detail of the aftermath, the lens focusing on Ben's tear-streaked face and Karen's satisfied expression in the background. "You tasered a child, a 12-year-old child." Sarah's voice rose to a shriek that carried across the entire park, drawing concerned parents and bystanders toward the scene. Several people began reaching for their phones, some calling 911, while others started recording the unfolding drama. Karen showed no remorse as she holstered her weapon, her expression remaining coldly satisfied. "He was exhibiting threatening behavior, and I defended myself and the other children here. If you had been a responsible parent and controlled him properly, none of this would have happened." The accusation of negligent parenting struck Sarah with the force of a second electric shock. After years of fighting for her son's rights, advocating for understanding and accommodation, working tirelessly with therapists and teachers to help him navigate a world that often seemed hostile to his differences, to have her parenting questioned in such a moment felt like the ultimate betrayal. Threatening behavior. "He's autistic. Those were coping mechanisms his therapist taught him." Sarah's voice broke as she gently helped Ben sit up, his small body still shaking from the electrical assault. You just assaulted a disabled child for stimming in a public park." The crowd that had gathered murmured with growing disapproval as the reality of the situation became clear. Parents pulled their own children closer, their faces reflecting horror and disbelief at what they had witnessed. An elderly man stepped forward, his voice shaking with indignation as he addressed Karen directly. "Lady, I don't know what you think you saw, but that boy wasn't threatening anyone. He was just sitting there, playing with a stick in the sand." The man's weathered hands gestured toward the scattered therapy tools and the small depression in the sand where Ben had been working on his calming exercises. Karen's confidence began to waver as more voices joined in condemnation of her actions. A young mother with a stroller stepped forward, her voice clear and angry. "I've been watching from over there for 20 minutes. That child never did anything aggressive. You attacked him for no reason." The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as emergency responders converged on the park. Sarah continued to hold her son, whispering reassurances while her mind raced with the implications of what had just occurred. The body camera continued recording, capturing not just the immediate aftermath, but also the reactions of the gathering crowd and Karen's increasingly defensive posture. Paramedics arrived first, their professional demeanor immediately shifting to concern as they assessed Ben's condition. The lead EMT, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, knelt beside them with practiced gentleness. "Can you tell me what happened here? I need to know what kind of device was used and how long ago." She tasered him. A civilian taser. "It's been maybe 3 or 4 minutes now." Sarah's voice was barely steady as she provided the critical information while never taking her eyes off her son's face. Ben's breathing had steadied somewhat, but his eyes still held the wild look of someone who had experienced sudden, inexplicable violence. The EMT's expression darkened as she began her examination, her hands moving with professional efficiency while maintaining a gentle touch. "I need to check for burns and monitor his heart rhythm. Tasering a child, especially one with special needs, can have serious complications." Police officers arrived as the medical team worked, their presence immediately commanding attention from the gathered crowd. Officer Jennifer Martinez approached Sarah with a professional but sympathetic demeanor, her notepad already in hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to get your statement about what happened here. Can you walk me through the events leading up to the incident?" Sarah began recounting the afternoon's events, her voice growing stronger as she described Karen's escalating hostility and unprovoked attack on her son. The crowd murmured agreement as she spoke, several people offering to serve as witnesses to corroborate her account of Karen's aggressive behavior and Ben's peaceful activities. Karen, meanwhile, maintained her defensive stance with the second officer, her voice rising as she insisted on her right to self-defense. "That boy was exhibiting aggressive patterns. I felt threatened, and I have every right to protect myself and the other children in this park. His mother should have had him under better control." Officer Martinez exchanged a look with her partner before addressing Karen directly. "Ma'am, from what I'm hearing from multiple witnesses, this child was sitting quietly in the sand when you approached and escalated the situation. Using a taser on a 12-year-old for stimming behaviors is not self-defense." The truth was becoming undeniable as more witnesses came forward with consistent accounts of Ben's peaceful behavior and Karen's unprovoked aggression. The elderly man who had spoken earlier provided a detailed timeline of events, while the young mother with the stroller offered her phone recording as additional evidence. But Sarah knew she possessed the most crucial evidence of all. Her body camera had captured everything from multiple angles, providing an unbiased record of the entire incident from start to finish. As Ben was being checked by the paramedics, she quietly informed Officer Martinez about the recording device. "Officer, I need you to know that I was recording this afternoon. My son's therapist recommended documenting his coping strategies for clinical purposes. The camera captured everything that happened. Sarah's voice carried a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. Officer Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly as she processed this information. You have video evidence of the entire incident that would be extremely valuable for our investigation. Would you be willing to provide a copy for our report? Sarah nodded without hesitation, her protective instincts now channeled into ensuring justice for her son. Absolutely. I want everyone to see exactly what happened here today. I want them to understand what my son went through and why. The revelation of video evidence shifted the entire dynamic of the investigation. Karen's confident assertions began to crumble as she realized that her version of events would be contradicted by objective documentation. Her face grew pale as the implications became clear, and her earlier bravado gave way to nervous fidgeting. As Ben's condition stabilized and he was cleared by the medical team, Sarah made a decision that would prove prophetic. That evening, after ensuring her son was safe and comfortable at home, she uploaded the body camera footage to social media with a detailed account of what had transpired at the park. The video began with Ben's peaceful therapy session, showing him using his coping strategies exactly as Dr. Williams had taught him. His gentle movements, quiet humming, and focused attention on his calming exercises painted a picture of a child managing his disability with remarkable maturity and self-awareness. The footage then captured Karen's approach and escalating hostility, her voice clearly audible as she characterized Ben's therapeutic behaviors as aggressive and threatening. The contrast between her inflammatory language and Ben's obvious harmlessness was stark and undeniable. Most damning of all was the moment of the actual attack, captured in high definition as Karen drew her taser and fired it at a cowering child who posed no threat to anyone. Ben's scream of pain and terror, followed by his convulsions and Sarah's anguished cries, created a record that no amount of legal maneuvering could explain away. Sarah's post was shared first within autism support groups, where parents recognized the injustice and began spreading the word. From there, it jumped to disability rights organizations, mainstream social media platforms, and eventually caught the attention of major news outlets. The response was swift and overwhelming. Justice for Ben began trending within hours as thousands of people shared their own stories of discrimination and misunderstanding faced by autistic individuals. Parents, therapists, advocates, and allies joined together in a chorus of outrage that demanded accountability. The video went viral overnight, racking up millions of views and generating thousands of comments from people horrified by what they witnessed. Disability rights activists used it as a rallying cry for better protection of vulnerable individuals, while legal experts analyzed Karen's actions and predicted serious criminal charges. News crews descended on Willowbrook community the following morning, their satellite trucks lining the streets as reporters sought interviews with residents and officials. The Homeowners Association found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight as questions arose about Karen's position and authority within the organization. Dr. Williams, Ben's therapist, agreed to speak with reporters about the therapeutic techniques Ben had been practicing and the utter harmlessness of his behaviors. Her professional expertise provided crucial context that further undermined any attempt to justify Karen's actions as reasonable or necessary. What you see in that video is a child using evidence-based coping strategies to manage sensory input and emotional regulation. There is absolutely nothing threatening or aggressive about stimming behaviors. They are as natural and necessary for autistic individuals as breathing. Dr. Williams' calm, professional tone carried the weight of scientific authority. The Willowbrook Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting for the following evening, facing unprecedented pressure from both within the community and from external advocacy groups. The meeting hall was packed beyond capacity as residents gathered to address the crisis that had engulfed their neighborhood. Sarah arrived at the meeting with Ben, both of them flanked by supporters from the disability rights community and their legal representation. The sight of the small boy who had suffered such public humiliation drew audible gasps from the assembled crowd, many of whom were seeing him in person for the first time. Karen sat in the front row, her previous confidence replaced by obvious anxiety as she faced a room full of hostile stares and whispered condemnations. Her legal counsel sat beside her, frantically reviewing documents and whispering urgent instructions about remaining silent. HOA President Robert Thompson called the meeting to order with visible discomfort, his usual authority undermined by the extraordinary circumstances. "We're here tonight to address the serious incident that occurred in our community park and to determine appropriate actions moving forward." The first speaker was Mrs. Elena Vasquez, a longtime resident and retired teacher who had worked extensively with special needs children. Her voice shook with emotion as she addressed the assembled crowd. "I have watched that video dozens of times, and each viewing breaks my heart more than the last. What happened to Ben Martinez was not just an assault on one child. It was an attack on every disabled person in our community." One by one, residents stood to speak, their voices joining in a chorus of condemnation for Karen's actions and support for Ben and his family. Parents of children with disabilities shared their own experiences with discrimination and misunderstanding, while allies spoke about the importance of creating inclusive spaces for all community members. The turning point came when Tom Bradley, a respected veteran and former police officer, stood to address the crowd. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with genuine threats and dangerous situations. "I've seen real aggression. I know what an actual threat looks like. What I saw in that video was not a threat. It was a scared little boy being tortured by an adult who should have known better." The crowd erupted in applause as Tom continued, his weathered face reflecting years of experience with violence and its aftermath. "Anyone who can watch that footage and still claim that child posed a danger to anyone is either lying or completely delusional. What Karen Hutchinson did was not self-defense. It was assault, plain and simple." Sarah was invited to speak on behalf of her family, and she approached the podium with Ben beside her, their connection visible in the way she gently guided him forward. Her voice was clear and strong as she addressed the community that had become the center of a national conversation about disability rights. "My son is not a threat to anyone. He is a gentle, loving child who works hard every day to navigate a world that often doesn't understand him. The techniques he was practicing in the park were taught to him by licensed professionals to help him cope with sensory overload and anxiety." She paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected a mixture of sympathy, anger, and determination. What happened to Ben could happen to any disabled child in any community. The question we need to ask ourselves is what kind of place we want Willowbrook to be. Do we want to be a community that protects its most vulnerable members, or one that tolerates their abuse? The response was immediate and overwhelming. The crowd rose in a sustained standing ovation that lasted several minutes, with many people wiping away tears as they applauded. Ben, initially startled by the sudden noise, gradually relaxed as he realized the sounds were supportive rather than threatening. When the applause finally died down, President Thompson called for formal motions regarding Karen's continued membership in the HOA and her access to community facilities. The vote was swift and decisive. Karen Hutchinson was immediately removed from all positions of authority within the organization and banned from community events and facilities pending the resolution of criminal charges. The legal consequences followed quickly. District Attorney Michelle Rodriguez announced the filing of multiple felony charges against Karen including assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, and violation of civil rights. The video evidence made the case ironclad, and legal experts predicted a certain conviction. This case represents a clear violation of a disabled child's civil rights and a shocking example of violence against a vulnerable individual. We will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law and seek appropriate penalties for these heinous actions. The DA's statement was broadcast on every major news network, ensuring national attention remained focused on the case. The civil lawsuit followed shortly after, with Sarah's legal team filing claims for assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The video evidence that had sparked the initial outrage now became the foundation for seeking both compensatory and punitive damages. Karen's attempts to mount a defense crumbled under the weight of objective evidence. Her lawyer's initial strategy of claiming self-defense was abandoned after the video clearly showed Ben posed no threat whatsoever. Subsequent attempts to argue temporary insanity or extreme emotional disturbance were similarly unsuccessful. The national attention brought unexpected benefits to the autism community. Major disability rights organizations used the case to highlight the need for better education about autism spectrum disorders and stronger protections for disabled individuals in public spaces. Legislative proposals for enhanced hate crime penalties and mandatory autism awareness training began moving through state legislatures. Corporate sponsors and private donors established the Ben Martinez Foundation for Autism Advocacy, providing resources for families navigating similar challenges and supporting research into better therapeutic interventions. The Foundation's first initiative was a nationwide campaign to educate first responders and security personnel about autism behaviors and appropriate responses. 6 months after the incident, Karen Hutchinson pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. The plea agreement included mandatory anger management classes, community service with disability organizations, and a substantial financial settlement for Ben and his family. The civil case was resolved more quickly, with Karen's insurance company agreeing to a 7-figure settlement that would provide for Ben's ongoing therapy and educational needs. More importantly, the case established legal precedent that using weapons against individuals exhibiting autism behaviors constitutes a hate crime with enhanced penalties. The Willowbrook community used the tragedy as an opportunity for growth and education. The HOA implemented mandatory disability awareness training for all residents and established a special committee dedicated to ensuring the community remained welcoming and accessible for individuals with disabilities. The park where the incident occurred was renamed the Ben Martinez Memorial Park for inclusion and understanding, with new installations designed to support individuals with sensory processing differences. A memorial garden featured plants selected for their therapeutic properties and sensory appeal, creating a space where children like Ben could practice their coping strategies in peace. Dr. Williams used the case in her professional presentations, helping other therapists understand the importance of documenting therapeutic interventions and advocating for their clients' rights in community settings. The body camera footage became a powerful teaching tool, demonstrating both the reality of autism behaviors and the tragic consequences of ignorance and fear. For Ben and Sarah, the journey toward healing was longer and more complex than the legal proceedings. The trauma of the attack had lasting effects on Ben's comfort level in public spaces, requiring intensive therapy to help him regain confidence in his coping strategies. Sarah struggled with her own trauma and the weight of having become an unwilling public figure in the disability rights movement. But there were positive developments as well. The outpouring of support from the autism community provided connections with other families facing similar challenges. Ben found pen pals among other autistic children who understood his experiences, and Sarah connected with a network of advocates who became lifelong friends and allies. The therapeutic breakthroughs came gradually. Ben slowly regained his comfort with the breathing exercises and sensory regulation techniques that had been so effective before the attack. His therapist introduced new strategies for managing the anxiety associated with public spaces. And Ben began to see himself not as a victim, but as a survivor who had helped make the world safer for other children like him. A year after the incident, Ben returned to the renamed park for the first time since the attack. The memorial garden had been completed, featuring the therapeutic plants and sensory-friendly design elements that made it a truly inclusive space. He spent an hour there with his mother, practicing his calming techniques in the same location where he had once been brutalized for doing exactly the same thing. The sound of children playing nearby no longer filled him with anxiety. The sight of adults approaching didn't trigger panic responses. The therapeutic work had been successful. But more importantly, the community had changed around him. The education campaigns and awareness initiatives had created an environment where his differences were understood rather than feared. Sarah watched her son from the same bench where she had sat on that terrible day. But now, her heart was filled with pride rather than terror. The body camera she wore was no longer just for clinical documentation, but had become a symbol of the power of truth and the importance of bearing witness to both injustice and healing. The final chapter of their story was still being written, but the trajectory was clear. Ben's courage in facing his trauma had inspired countless other families to share their own stories and demand better treatment for disabled individuals. Sarah's decision to make the video public had sparked a movement that extended far beyond their small community. As they walked home that evening, Ben reached for his mother's hand in a gesture that had become rare since the attack. His voice was quiet but confident as he spoke the words that would become the foundation for their continued healing and advocacy. "Mom, I'm not scared anymore. I think we helped other kids who are like me." Sarah squeezed his hand gently, her heart full with the knowledge that their pain had been transformed into purpose. The silent witness of the body camera had given voice to countless others who had suffered in silence, and their story had become a beacon of hope for families everywhere who were fighting for understanding, acceptance, and justice. The evening sun cast long shadows across the memorial garden as mother and son made their way home, their footsteps echoing the rhythm of healing and the promise of a future where no child would face such cruelty for simply being themselves. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and a community had been transformed. In the end, that was enough to make their suffering meaningful and their courage worthwhile.